So I was recently asked, what can the community do to fight back against Games Workshop? And I understand right now is not unique. There have been other times where Games Workshop has rolled out new armies, new additions, new restrictions, new ideas with social media. I mean, as of right now, there's a lot of attention on Warhammer Plus and what that means with fan content, or what that means not only in the YouTube ecosystem, but websites and also those that participate in the 40K lore and narrative outside of mainstream GW. If they're going to come with a ban hammer on everything, what does that mean? So certainly in that understanding, there is this feeling of we're customers of Games Workshop, but we're also community members. And sometimes it's very, very hard to be both, because Games Workshop does put out amazing models. The artwork is amazing. The narrative is very, very captivating. I mean, that's, for me, a lot of 40K, of course, is the community, is those of you out here that I've had a great chance to meet and play with, or just back and forth to be part of your gaming life. As you're listening to these vlogs, we're immersed in the community. But that said, I like the lore. I like the Grimdark. I like Chaos Space Marines. I like undead robots. I like space bugs. I like space Romans, right? Playing those forces on the table, the miniatures and the models appeal to me. It's a universe that, from a role-playing perspective and a narrative, I like to explore. So I'm there with the community, but at the same time, I feel like, well, I'm there with Games Workshop because I want them to be successful and be motivated to put out more models and new stuff. I want them to say, hey, let's take a risk and make some of these bigger kits and try and push this out. I want them to say, hey, here's some ideas for supplements. But that also means I'm at their complete mercy, and the loyalty of, I want to support the community. I do support the community. So when GW nukes a channel or hits the ban hammer, how do we reconcile that? So this led to the question of, how do you fight back against Games Workshop? And when I was asked this question through a friend, I don't know if there's anything to really fight back on, because 40K is the community where you play. The models and the rules, I think, and this is not always the easiest to do, they're just an excuse. You know, they're optional. If I can pull a Dungeons and Dragons perspective in some of the older D&D manuals and books, especially the Dungeon Master's Guide, if you're familiar with that, there was always something in there saying, as the Dungeon Master, who's the person, the player leading the story, leading the game, the idea was they're all optional, these rules. I mean, these are suggestions. This is the flow of the game. But as a Dungeon Master, at any moment, you can override anything and change anything, or literally make it up as you go. Be open to the experimentation. Games Workshop wants to have us believe that this is the only way to 40K. You know, 40K is for everybody, they say. But it's only for everybody if you play through their lens. They control social media. They dominate everything. Here's the newest edition. You can't pull any stuff in from older edition. You can't use your old models. When we get a new edition, you're on board. All social media and all new media is going to be through Warhammer Plus. You're either on board or you're not. If not, we're going to suppress you. I mean, I know I'm kind of condensing and maybe exaggerating a little bit, or am I? That's how they want us to play 40K. I counter that and say, experiment. Play with different aspects of 40K. Pull in some stuff. Look and ask yourself as a community, how can I not go head to head with my opponent, with my player, but how can we set up a narrative? How can we set up something to have fun? And maybe that's not always balanced. Or maybe that's like, hey, I had a cool idea for a new type of character for my chapter, utilizing some war gear from another codex. One of the things that we explored, now this is a while back, where the Chaos Codex had the Murder Sword. And I had a friend, custom chapter, Space Marine chapter, he wanted to utilize that Murder Sword, that artifact from the Chaos book. And the idea was that this chapter master was the ends always justify the means, you know, pulling that kind of focus, that philosophy in from the Jesuits and saying, this is how I want to utilize it. My chapter master is going to use chaos to fight chaos. So he wants to use the Murder Sword. So I'm like, okay, I mean, we've got the stats. and I guess pay the price from the Chaos Codex. It's not like GW is balanced anyway. But I said, what do you think would be fair? What do you think would be fair? And he, pulling in some stuff, some flavor from the older Chaos Codex, the idea was he could carry the Murder Sword, but in order to utilize it, and he'd pay the points, whatever it was, 45 points at the time. When it came into use, he would first have to make a leadership test. And if he failed that leadership test, and leadership test 10, are you going to fail it? You never know. Look, anytime you roll the dice, you never know what's going to happen. If it failed, then it would attack him, or he'd have to take the profile against him. I'm like, hey, you got the miniature, you converted it, you showed the love. You're not just trying to metagame, you're committed. You took something a little bit wacky that might hurt you, and playing my Templars, my Emperor's Champion, I would love to fight against such a heretic. And because our chapters were going head to head because of his heresy, like, I'm up for that. So Games Workshop would be like, you can't do that. I mean, first of all, you're using stuff from older codexes, older books. Can't do that because we're banning it. You're pulling in some older models. Can't do that. We're banning that. And you're not using the official Warhammers for Everybody Grimdark, so we're banning that. Okay, I'm still going to play 40K from that way. That's the counter. That is the counter. Be open to experimenting, exploring, and embracing 40K. And if your opponent, replace that with 40K friend, if they want to try something out, let's do it. Let's see what happens. You want to pull in some older models? You want to pull in some experimental stuff? This was 40K, not just back in Rogue Trader, but if you go back and look at some of the older editions, and certainly the newest edition of 40K is the most robust, but there was always this idea in 40K of like, experiment, creation rules, bend the rules a little bit, create the narrative. And I think over the years, possibly over the decades, Games Workshop realized we need to control every aspect because we can't feed you FOMO and we can't feed you limited release stuff and new stuff that if you don't buy now, we can't nerf your army, because if we nerf your army and you don't accept it or you want to change it, perfect example. I know I'm pulling way back from history, but this was a big deal at the time. Storm Shields gave you a 5+ invulnerable, and GW wanting to sell Space Marines. I don't even know what edition this was, but this was a big uproar, even more than the old Knob Bikers back in the day, and spreading out wounds so nothing would happen and your entire army couldn't defeat them. This idea that they replaced in the new Space Marine chapter Storm Shields 3+ invulnerable. Now everyone is running out there doing it. And Games Workshop, of course, being GW, did not update the Black Templars and other older codexes. So I'm playing my Black Templars, and tournament organizers and other elements of the 40K community were like, nope, rules is written. That's what Games Workshop says. This is how 40K is for everybody. And I'm like, did I not get the memo from Mars? Did I not get the replacement from Mars? They didn't ship it out? Like, is that what I have to justify in my mind? Where the real thing would have been, Games Workshop's not updating. They don't care about Templars at the time. So look, dude, just, of course, update everything to 3+. And you're already paying overpriced for your Marines everywhere. And forget about when Marines got grenades for free, how that changed. Anyway, we're going down ancient history that doesn't matter. But this idea of how you would fight back against Games Workshop, don't let them rule your 40K. Be open to experimentation. Be open to narrative. Honestly, approach it from the perspective of a role-playing game. Utilize your models as an excuse or an exercise or a way to create something on the tabletop in that moment for the next 2 or 3 hours that we're going to play 40K. How can you and I do it together as partners with opposite armies? And we're going to try and kill each other on the table. Yes, absolutely. But how can we do that? I think if that's the mass focus of the 40K community, then it doesn't really matter what Games Workshop does.